Welcome. As again, Genevieve said, my name is Drew Goodmanson. I'm from San Diego, and I am primarily a church planner. I've been involved in 6 church plants in San Diego, where I came originally from Seattle, Washington, and I was a part of a church called Mars Hill, back when it was about 100 people, and I just fell in love with this idea of starting churches. So Mars Hill is no longer 100 people, it's grown and taken over many worlds, right? But really love the idea of church planning. And it was in that this desire to use technology to further the gospel, connect people to church, and really be a valuable and powerful tool was birthed. And so I learned how to do HTML and then CSS, and I started coding websites. And a funny thing happened. We planted with a small church, and I learned how to do some search engine optimization. And when that happened, we started having more people show up than the small group of people that we began with in a home. And just saw how powerful these technologies were. And so started a company called MonkDev. We now have about 5,000 churches and ministries that use our technology. And so it's always fun to come back to Dallas. We've got Prestonwood and First Baptist Dallas. We've got the Village locally. We've got a number of churches here in Dallas and around the country that are using the technologies and services we provide. So again, really for us, it was birthed out of ministry, wanting to serve churches with these tools to further the gospel. And it's going to be a bit of information. I'm going to give you a lot of the research that we've done so that you can go back and really make some good decisions and adjust potentially the way that you're approaching the web. So if you're not able to write all of this down, feel free to email me and I can get you the information today so that you can just kind of engage and not feel like you're scribbling notes as we have some different statistics and information that we think is going to be helpful. Again, this is my wife and kids. I like this picture. My son wanted to be a superhero. He put on the duct tape. His brother was super excited about it and put the duct tape on. He wasn't as happy taking it off. He didn't realize that was part of the bargain, but I always like that picture. So, good, we'll begin. It isn't a stretch for most of us to understand that the internet is now the most essential medium in our life. I think it was about 2-3 years ago we were trying to convince people of that reality. But now more and more people are saying they would rather get rid of their television than get rid of internet. How many of you guys have cut the cord on cable and have gotten rid of it totally? A handful of us, right? So more and more, the internet is really where we live and breathe and are spending our time. And so a lot of times it's taken organizations a big adjustment to understand the shift that we're in the middle of. And really I want us to understand it as that kind of significant shift where technology is a layer in between how we see the world more and more. We're coming out with new technology that's going to be able to take pictures or look at a different landscape, and it's going to give us information about the building or where you can buy things or where our friends are. More and more, it's technology like this black hole where everything is moving onto the web. Our lives, our shoes are going to wirelessly communicate and tell us how often we're walking. Embarrassingly, we're going to go to the bathroom and it's going to tell us what we need to add to our diet, right? I mean, it's going to pervade every aspect of our life. And it is not slowing down. I mean, many of us are just trying to catch up to where we are today, but it is not slowing down. That the exponential rate of how technology is evolving in our life is shifting culture. And I think it's part of why when we look at the culture shift, we're seeing a generational divide. It really, the new generation of people, the Gen Y and the millennials, are adopting these technologies and social media because it lines up with their worldview. And so decentralization of power, communication and authority, all of these things are issues that organizations are wrestling through, that are big ideas that they have to sit down and consider how they're going to navigate these things. As I said, technology is something that we're starting to outsource our brains. There was a study that said that people are forgetting more and more information that they know they can Google, right? I mean, how many cell phone numbers do we remember? We trust that it's on our cell phone. I think I know 2 by heart, and it's only because they've had them for so long, and one of them's my wife, right? So there's very few cell phone numbers that I remember because I've given that portion of my brain over to my cell phone, right? And I think more and more we are giving over our information. So there's a lot of consequences to that, and I do whole sessions on the consequences of technology, which is a different session, but there's things that we've got to consider. I mean, more and more we're gonna be able to forget people's names and just look at our phone and remember, okay, this is how I know that person, and this is who they are, and we're connected on Facebook or LinkedIn. And so this is the world that we're moving into. And so we're going to look at three things today. Really, how do you attract more people, and how do you engage your existing congregation, and how do you use some of this technology to help facilitate discipleship? Those are the three things that I'm going to want you to walk away with an understanding, and building a whole web strategy to do those things. But before I begin, as we work with churches around the country, some of the largest and fastest growing churches, and some that are church plants, so everything in between that we work with, I think there's about 6 things that we find that are common problems that every church, these are the common problems we run into when we talk with churches that they struggle with when it comes to the web. The first one is some of them they have what's called the Sky Mall syndrome. Many of us flew into this conference on a plane, and if we're bored and we forgot something to read, we put our hand in the back and we pull out the Sky Mall catalog, and it's the most worthless things you've ever seen, right? I mean, you're like, do I really need a squirrel that I can attach to my hose so it's a sprinkler? Am I really that excited about that? Churches suffer from the same problem. A lot of times they look online, a senior pastor maybe sees some other church with some fancy technology, and they get really excited about it. And so they come back and they say, hey, I want to do something like this. And so one of the challenges we find is the churches haven't really thought through why they're using the web and technology. They just know it looks pretty and it can be flashy and there can be all sorts of interaction. So they get blinded by what they're excited about without really working through a strategy. Second challenge that we find is what I call ministry schizophrenia. They don't know who they are. And so a lot of times the church has a particular vision and passion for what they're about, but all of the different ministry leaders and staff are all going in different directions, and there's not alignment. And so as a church, you really got to think through, how are you going to get everyone to work in their different areas, but work together for the same goal? Because what we've found is there can be a lot of fighting, and who gets priority on the website, who gets the loudest voice, and a lot of times those things that they're trying to communicate aren't really lined up with what you're trying to do and be about as a local church. The third thing that we see, we call enough about you, let's talk about me. They build a website to celebrate themselves, but often they haven't thought through the user experience. Meaning they might promote their different ministries, and they'll have names like we're, the Jericho group, come and join this. Nobody knows what that is, right? And so a lot of what they've designed and put together is for an internal group of people that all share the same language and have been trained to understand what these different terms are, but they haven't ever sat down and said, what if I was a new visitor? What if I just started coming to this church and I went online? Would I understand any of these things? Or really, is this church website and the way that they're engaging the web all about themselves, and it hasn't thought through that user experience? Thirdly, we'd say that the blind leading the blind. This is where people, to navigate a project like a construction of a new worship facility is a complicated thing. But for some reason, often people think because a nephew or a friend has got some web experience, that they bring them in to navigate and build out pretty complex web strategies. And so they don't know what they're doing. They don't understand the complications. They don't know all the potential pitfalls. And so they're just leading people in to build something, but it doesn't quite ever deliver on the results. When they launch their website, it may look nice, but it isn't achieving the return on investment that they were trying to put in, because the people did not have the experience or the expertise to understand how to navigate that kind of project. The next one we call is death by committees. This is where it takes so long to make a decision that by the time you decide to say, yes, we have decided to get on MySpace, it's a little too late. Most people have moved from it. And so the decision-making process with technology is a different environment. It needs an agile team who are looking at the different technologies and are understanding what is happening. When you look at Twitter, for example, Princeton, Biola, Willow Creek, all of them did not get their Twitter handle. Somebody else did before they did. Who in your organization is enabled to go out and ensure that your presence on the web is being managed? And you're thinking about, what's the next Twitter? Should we be on Tumblr? What's going on with these different technologies where we should go and get our name so that somebody who's getting it isn't a disgruntled former congregant who's got nothing but gripes to say about your senior pastor. All right, so when you have committees, it can bog that process down and really slow, where the web doesn't wait for that. We've got story after story of people who just took so long to respond, who hadn't put together the guidelines, that hadn't released the people to actually do these things, that the church just seemed very uncaring, and a lot of the things that they valued in the physical connections and the life of the community were completely disconnected to how they were online. And people sense that, and in this culture, more and more that disconnect is not accepted. They will judge you based on their first interactions with you online. And so death by committees is another one. And then lastly, and one that we see very common, we call the volunteer hostage situation. Often this is with smaller churches that don't have a team of people in place, but it can be with larger churches that haven't resourced the technology area appropriately, or they get a volunteer to manage their web presence, and they build something, and then they move, or they're in their basement in their undies playing Xbox, and you need something updated on the website, and you can't get a hold of them, and it's Easter's coming up, and you've still got Christmas information up, and it's an awkward situation for everyone. And so the whole website and web presence has been taken over by a volunteer hostage situation. So these are the common challenges that we find when we go into churches and help them navigate this process. And so some of you guys may be senior pastors, but for those that aren't, I ask, how are you going to lead up and facilitate this plan to have a web strategy at your church? What are you going to do? And I'm going to share a little bit about what we do, and then I'm going to share some stories of some best practices that you can take away today and use. So one of the things that we do is we have a giant piece of paper that we take onto a wall, and it's a tool that you can use. You can find something of your own, a tool like this, and we just take the senior leadership through and bring clarity to what is it they're wanting to do. What is their big idea? What is their vision, their values? Why are they going online? What are they about? Really, who is the DNA in the church? If you have a senior team, I would suggest that you find some sort of process where you can bring together everyone and agree to what it is that you're trying to accomplish when it comes to the website. Secondly, data. It's amazing to me how few people understand the analytics of what's happening on their website. We worked with one church that was spending $80,000 a year on billboards, and they had never looked that they were getting about 800 people a year that were going to the landing page they were promoting. They were spending a lot of money for very little return. Or another church we were working with has Sunday schools, and they wanted to build a very interactive experience to help people connect to Sunday schools on Sunday. Something like 0.01% of the people that visited the website were even going to look for Sunday school information. Typically when they were there, they were in the building, walking around, going from room to room, or they had something in their hand. It wasn't necessary. So they were going to spend a lot of time, energy, and resources on things that were not valuable. So look at the data. If you've not put Google Analytics or something in place, you've got to do that immediately so that you can track what's happening. Also, we look at like Facebook and understand if most of your referrals are coming from Facebook, you can invest your time and energy on other websites to ensure your presence is there based on who's coming from where. Here's an example of a client, Denver Seminary, where they get a lot from Wikipedia, right? So that's somewhere they want to make sure that information is accurate. And Facebook is their number one referrer. So they spend much of their time there. The other thing that we use as a tool is called SurveyMonkey. There's Wufoo, SurveyMonkey. There's a number of different things where we do congregational studies, where we ask them questions, where we help look at the types of people that you have in your congregation. And we begin to flesh out a plan for them and for your church based on that information of the congregant. And some of those are free tools that you can build, surveys, and then just email that out and get some good information. And then we also look at a sociographic profile where we can create and understand the different types of people in your church. Right now, a lot of churches are moving into online communities, but there are a lot of challenges with launching these in local churches. I mean, people are struggling with app fatigue. They don't want another login. They don't know how to lead people into this process. And so we're seeing a lot of people abandon these online communities that they started just a year or two ago because they're not getting the results that they wanted. And also, they have not staffed appropriately for that. Desiring God is an example of that, where they had a private community. When they realized it was going to need a full-time online community manager, they just said, we can't commit the resources right now, so they shut down their private community. So again, these decisions that you're making aren't just things that are done in a vacuum. They require organizational change. Often you have to think of who's staffing these positions, how many hours are they spending. It's a radical shift. You can't just add it on to what you're already doing. It requires a change of behavior, and it requires you to lead your team through understanding the types of hours and commitment necessary to succeed online. More and more churches, whether you agree or disagree, are launching digital pastors where their role is to interact with people online. I speak at a conference called Echo. About 3 years ago, I did a session, and there's one person who was kind of an online pastor. This last time, there's probably 15 people in the room that were online pastors. I mean, it is a growing area because churches are investing more and more of their time connecting with people in this environment because people are online, right? So those are some different ways that you can capture information. You can build these and use these tools and get a profile, get a direction, align your ministries together, where we also work with the ministry leaders so that they were all working together when it comes to building an online strategy. And then let's look at 3 things today. One is, how do you build awareness? In our congregational research, 27% of new visitors are now finding the church online first. Are you experiencing that? People are finding your church not because you're down the street and in the community church in the neighborhood. They are going online and they are finding you first. And they are driving past a lot of other churches to go to yours because they've connected with you online. In fact, when we looked at it, over 60% of people said that the website was somewhat to very important in their decision to attend the church. That's a powerful piece in how you're connecting and communicating with people. And so what you present matters. Here's some examples. Park. I mean, if you look at this, people are making an impression of this church immediately. What do you think of when you see this? Yes, it's inner city. It's a younger demographic. They're a little more technologically savvy than the average church. So Park is a church that is communicating to a people group, and people are connecting with them. Or you can look at something like this. How is this different? So this is Oasis. It's in LA. There's a lot of different colors. There's creativity. It says that it's live. Therefore, it's demonstrating it values a certain production level. It's connecting to I'm New people. And a lot of people say that they think it's about the senior pastor. In fairness, this is the 4th rotator. So if you waited a while, you'd eventually see this. Because the homepage rotates through different things. So it isn't necessarily personality driven. Friends of ours up in Soma, in Tacoma. This is a church that's trying to reach unchurched people groups. And they're trying to marry an artistic, grungy, blue-collarness of Tacoma to a people that are not primarily churched. And so when you look at this, people that are churched, they have some understanding of these words and terms, but they're not as familiar to us. And one interesting thing, non-Christians don't go to church websites and then decide to go to a church. It doesn't happen that often. It's primarily Christians who are moving to your towns, or maybe they grew up in the church and they're finally returning. they're the primary people that are using the website to make these types of decisions. Another example near where I live is a place called Foothills. They have a big initiative to connect to the youth in the community. So you see youth and schools, and it's very much connecting families into their local church. And so they design that, and they've got microsites where they build other websites just for the high school group, and they want to have a cool experience, and so they have lava because everyone knows lava means cool, and they've got a rock band, so they've got a different experience because they're trying to connect to those people, and that's their initiative. We worked with a church called Willowbrook, and they do, in Huntsville, I guess it doesn't cost much to advertise on the television, so they do 60-second spots quite frequently. And so they would do these all the time, and then people would go to their website. And this is a comment that is very common. When we moved, a church's website has to be our first filter to find a church. A lot of churches had crummy websites, and regardless of how great a church they may be, we pass them by. Right? So they're doing these advertising, they're getting people that are potentially looking at their church, and if you went there, this was their website. And they built this for new people. I think somewhere on the side there's a little what to expect button, but if you go there in Chrome, it showed this. 10% of their visitors were coming and experiencing this website. So if you saw the ad on television, you go there and you see that, are you going to wade through that? Or are you potentially going to pass them by because you're saying, I don't feel like I connect with a culture that isn't using technology well because I've got my iPhone 4. I'm more progressive than that, and there's a different value system that I have. So we worked with them, and we just tried to clean that up and simplify. And we launched this site, and it's really connecting the new people that was their passion. As we went through that one-page document about what was their big idea, they wanted to connect new people and make them disciples of Christ. And since they've launched, they've seen 115% increase in new visitor traffic that are going and exploring the information about this church. And so it's a totally different experience. They're getting the results that they were looking for, and they had missed a lot of opportunity prior to that. And through some ways that we do audience segmentation and the ways that we interact with them, we can build that kind of plan and see those types of results that you can see as well. When we look at a cross-pollination of churches across the country, we started to track what type of content did people visit when they visited the church website. And we started grouping them into different categories. Other than the homepage, you're seeing I'm new information at about 20%. It was the single largest thing that people were accessing, right? So again, when you think about your website, who is it for, and how are you designing it to accomplish those goals? There's a church that we worked with in San Diego called First United Methodist Church. It's a large church. They have a very recognizable building right off the freeway. And I remember the first time I visited there, they had 3 different pictures of their building on their homepage. Right? So what are they communicating about the church? It's a significant value to have that kind of identity. But if it's overemphasized, is it telling people, hey, we're a building, right? And so this population was an aging population, and it also was in decline. And so they came to us, and we went through this process, and we tried to find a way to honor who they really were, right? You didn't want to get clip art of all sorts of young people playing in the grass and skipping and throwing the ball, and everyone goes there and they're like, what just happened? This is a bait and switch, right? So you need to represent who you really are, and we wanted to honor that. But we also tried to provide a pathway as people went through to show some of the youth and to really share the stories, because it was such a large church with so many different programs that nobody knew what was going on. And so to create a mechanism where we could capture the story of changed lives and surface that. And since we've launched this, they have seen a 56% increase in the people who are visiting I'm New area, and a 43% increase in people who are seeking directions to the church. That means on a monthly basis, they're getting 40 more people a month than they were that are going to the directions page to get information on how to go there. Right? So they're seeing and experiencing change, and that's the type of thing that we want to work with, and you should be thinking about as you design a website. And then here's the other question, and this is the existential question of the internet age. if no one visits your cool website, does it really exist, right? So you can have a website, but really there is a level of, we're in a post-website world. A lot of people aren't just going to go to your website and find it immediately by typing it in typing the URL. And so really what we talk about is internet presence management. Where are you and how are you representing yourself in the different places online? And one of the main ones that we've seen is during usability studies, 88% of web users go to a search engine first to accomplish a task, right? How many of us do that? If there's a medical issue, if you're trying to find a place to get a restaurant, you just go and Google it, right? And that is exactly what is happening. So how are you designing your website and your content to drive traffic for when people are searching for you? If people search for your name, can they find you? If they search for the city that you're in, does your church even exist in their mind? I worked with a local school who you couldn't even find on Google when you searched for their name. And there was a small private Lutheran school. We helped them get online, and their enrollment has increased by 1/3, right? So they went from like 70-something to 90 plus. I mean, that's a huge impact when you look at the opportunity that they had just to be found online. They were missing all of that. And a lot of churches are doing the same. And then when they find you, so even if they find you on Facebook and you've created a page, we found that if the people come from Facebook, they spend about 43 seconds on your website. So what is it that you're trying to communicate? How are you doing it clearly and quickly? And what action are you calling them to? And so there's a whole strategy of those 3 things that you need to devise for every people group, for every landing page, for every link that you're sending. You got to think through, what is it I'm trying to communicate? How am I going to help them agree with that? And then what am I calling them to next to do that? And so we talk about that as kind of audience segmentation, where if it's a new person, walk them through the experience, help them understand, what to expect and what that you believe and what are the next steps that you call them to. And there's high value things like showing up, but there might be smaller things like just getting their email information or having them begin a relationship with you so that you can encourage them down the road to connect to a local church. Again, not just because we want them in your church, we want them to hear the gospel. Right? So that is what we're trying to do. I don't believe that people can stay online and be the church. The one anothering passages are far too pervasive to do over the internet. I mean, if I'm not interacting with you regularly, how am I going to ever need to forgive you? Right? How am I going to be able to serve you? How am I going to be able to do all of these different 50-something one anothering passages that requires life on life? And so always our goal is to move people from an online environment into a physical relationship so they can participate in the local church. And there's other tools as well, like Foursquare and geolocation. This is a church that when people check in, they actually recruit anybody who checks in because they assume they're an early adopter, and they recruit them into their digital team to be ambassadors online and connect with more people and encourage them to connect with a local church. So that is the first, is awareness. The second one is engagement. In the congregational studies that we've done, 85% of people have said that the church website was somewhat to very important in their getting connected into the community of a church, right? You go in and you look at different areas that you can participate in. And I'll show you a couple of examples. We worked with the Village here in Dallas, and their old website threw everything up against the wall and said, I hope you find what you're looking for. There's a ton of information, and I think you kind of get overwhelmed. And they would launch a new campus, and it would reach capacity. So their issue was not necessarily attracting more people. They were doing okay with that. It was, how do we get these people connected into community? And so reducing the noise and really encouraging the behaviors that they were looking for, it was much more about events and ministries and connecting and getting involved in the local church and finding ways to serve. Their goal is to move from 60% to 80% of their congregation into small groups. And since the launch, they've had over 40% increase in people view the how do I get connected into a small group at our local church, right? So we're encouraging that kind of behavior. That's what they're wanting to do to drive that increase in small group participation. Or you have the City of Grace. This is in the Scottsdale area in Mesa, where you can filter and you start finding small groups based on your life stage or the different types or whether they have childcare. Again, you can start building ways for people to get connected into and engaged in the life of your community. And so if you have event registration, if you've got these different types of tools, it's really encouraging people to make that next step in the local church. And we see it because there's so much noise going on. How do you break through the noise? How do you get that mind share when they go online, particularly on your Facebook? On Facebook, they are not going to connect with you. They're going for themselves, and you're trying to interrupt some sort of pattern. And there's so much stuff going on. Really, how does a church build a communication plan that's going to accomplish what it's setting out to do? You know, there was the research that said that we used to see in the 70s 500 advertisements a day or marketing messages, and then it got to 3,000. Now they think it's upward of 5,000 a day, where you're just being bombarded with different information that's calling you to something. And so we're seeing a lot of churches like Life Center, which we used to have a lot of information up, just reduce and simplify and pick what's most important, right? So the whole background rotates based on the different things that are going on, and they're just trying to reduce the noise to break through and get a few important things done than just trying to do everything that they think is going to happen. And then the other thing we're doing is you launch private communities. The research that we've done is private communities most impact communications. 83% have said that an online member community or social network that's just for the church has impacted positively communication. There's other things like involvement and connectedness and other things that are coming from that, but that is the number one. And I think because we used to work in a world where we just do email newsletters and we'd send those out, now people can actually join very specific groups. They can set up their profile of how often they want to get contacted. Is it a daily digest? Is it every message? They can start filtering that information, and you can send the email, and then they can just email reply, and they can start connecting into the community and be more engaged. And again, they know when they get an email, it isn't just a blast about the women's ministry, and they're a 20-year-old single dude, and they're just like, I don't care, I don't want these anymore. And so they start to, you're training them to ignore things rather than speaking to them what they need, right, and helping them make those steps. So with that, I'm going to have Justin Wise here talk a little bit about social media. He's got a couple ideas. Again, he does hundreds of sessions on this, so we're trying to condense that down to a few good ideas.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone, and we will fly through some of these ideas. Again, as Drew mentioned, if you are interested in what we're talking about today, we can definitely connect you with these slides. But through the work that we do and just my kind of background, I'm sort of targeted in on social media, and there are a couple of trends that I have noticed that have begun to emerge, not only in the marketplace, but also in ministry. And we do webinars at Monk, monthly webinars on various topics, and sometimes those topics include social media. And I shared a few of these meta premises at a webinar we did a few months ago. And it was how to build a social media fan base. And the meta premise number one, as you can see here, unless you are Snooki, Rick Warren, or Lady Gaga, you will have to follow and interact with people to get them interested in what you're saying. Another way of saying that is we're in an opt-in economy, and not necessarily opt-in economy speaking from financial terms, but from attention terms. So if you think of people's attention or your attention span as something that you can spend, as Drew mentioned earlier, we are competing with folks' attention at a level never seen before in our society. And so the genius and really the difficulty also of social media is that you have to present a compelling reason or reasons for individuals to interact with your brand or your church or your ministry. And so a lot of folks simply believe that if they build it, that they will come. That is not necessarily the case. You have to give folks a reason to engage with you online. And so that's why I share, unless you are a celebrity where you have a built-in audience, you will need to work to engage with those folks online. The next meta premise is, unless you are Starbucks, Words with Friends, or Compassion International, your organization will have to work to build a fan base. Again, it's kind of the same concept, but coming at it from an organizational perspective. If you are a church or a ministry, and you are not a large church or ministry, you will have to work to engage your audience online. It does take work. This stat is courtesy of HubSpot. They do a lot of research in social media, and they're pointing out something that I think we all intuitively are picking up, that not just young folks, but really all generations are flocking online to social networks because they're seeing the power and really the beauty of being able to tailor make your input. So you can say, I want to hear from this brand and I don't want to hear from that brand. You have the ability to custom make the messages that are coming into your viewfinder on a day-to-day basis. And so, again, courtesy of HubSpot, it's showing the breakdown of percentages of folks who are gravitating towards social networks. And virtually all of these, in fact, are on the rise as the days go by. So those just keep going up and up and up. And actually, I think the 18 to 24-year-olds, which are typically defined as millennials and Generation Y, that's actually closer to about 96 to 98% right now. So virtually all of millennials are online doing social network in some fashion. Yeah.
I just changed it.
We did this one. We did the study and asked folks, what are your motivations for going online? Again, as you can see, the statistics are kind of hard to read, but the top 3 reasons were very interesting to me, and the top 3, if you can't read them, I'll read them for you. It says staying in touch with people, communicating with others, and sharing life experiences. So as we've kind of already alluded to earlier, folks are flocking online to connect with one another. And as I kind of share the same assertion that Drew does, offline trumps online. So face-to-face always is a better way of connecting with folks than online is, but when folks do go online, they want to go online to connect with other people who share the same ideas as them, who are part of the same organization as they are, who go to the same church that they do, and they want to share life experiences with those folks. So again, this is a study that we did, and the findings were not all that surprising, but very interesting nonetheless. So one of the kind of the topics that we are interested in finding more about and what we're really digging into is how do you run an effective online presence? How do you have an effective online presence? How do you engage people online? How do you create content that's compelling to people so they opt in to what you and your organization are saying? And one of the primary ways we found in doing that is by creating a very simple content calendar, an editorial calendar, call it what you will, but it's essentially lining up all of the different areas where your organization or where you personally are online and intentionally scheduling content to go out through those channels. And it's intentionally, as Drew alluded to earlier, it's giving your people, the people who are coming to your website either as a church or an organization, it's giving them a path to follow. It's making it very easy for them to say, okay, I read about this event on Twitter. Now I know that through this tweet, I'm going to go online and I'm going to find out more about that event. And then I'm going to go to a blog post that maybe tell me even more about that event. And then I'm going to go to a link that's going to show me how to register for that event. So it's intentionally setting up a content calendar. They can be weekly, they can be monthly. This actually is a screenshot from one of the sparsely filled out content calendars we have for Monk. We haven't quite filled that out for the month yet, but this is kind of how it looks like for us. And at the top, you can see all the different channels that we have online, and then the different rows are the different types of content we're pushing out through the different days of the month. And really, all it is being intentional about communicating with your community and saying, we care enough about you, online community, to give you fresh, original content that you can use and hopefully will add value to your life and add value to your participation in our organization.
And just to add something to this, I mean, this is something whether you have a couple hours a week or 40 hours. I mean, you can build content calendars based on your capability. because that's the other issue. A lot of churches haven't thought through how much time this can take, and so how do you be most effective with whatever, if you have limited time, to accomplish what you're looking to do?
Yeah, so one of the webinars we did was a social media strategy in 1 hour or less. For that particular reason, because I come from a ministry background, and lots of times in ministry you wear 100 different hats. And so you don't always have the luxury of having someone, even on part-time, doing social media content creation, social media management. And so I created a very basic, simple strategy in 1 hour or less. This is pretty comprehensive only because we have the resources to be able to put towards that. But you can really scale this, whether you have 1 hour a week, like Drew was saying, or full-time, or a staff to really dig into this. And again, those webinars are, you can find that on our blog, monkdevelopment.com/blog. They're there for you to access as well. Otherwise, get a hold of Drew or myself, and we can send you that way. But just some real quick takeaways in how to get started. I want to give you some practical tools on how to get started with building a social media strategy, really digging in and being intentional about your online presence, particularly in the social media sphere. Like I said, there are 5 quick takeaways that I want to share with you. One is to define your organizational big idea. Drew alluded to this earlier. This is what we walk organizations through with our one-pager. It's basically figuring out what you are about. And churches and ministries can't say the gospel. It's too broad. We believe that individual organizations, whether they be ministries or churches, have a very specific calling. And so we help organizations figure that out. So it's defining your organizational big idea, and then it's identifying the gunners and allowing them to build. That's essentially saying, enabling the people who get this space, enabling them to make decisions on behalf of the organization. And for a lot of senior leaders, that can be unnerving, but it is essential. A lot of the feedback we hear from senior leaders is, we know that this is important, but we simply don't have the mind space to dedicate towards figuring this out. That's when you say that's okay. Find someone in your organization who does and enable them to build. Certainly put up guardrails, but identify the gunners and allow them to build your social media presence. Thirdly, resource. And this certainly is a financial resource, but it's also a buy-in resource. So if you are in senior leadership, it's again that enabling, whether they be younger folks on staff or another person who does get this for your organization, who gets the social media space. It's resourcing them with time, talent, and treasure, as the saying goes. But really setting them up for success, whoever that may be. Creating context-specific content. So it's really knowing who your church is, who your ministry is, and creating content for them, content that's applicable for them, creating blog posts that make sense for your local community, and then sharing that with your online community. And lastly, adding value. If nothing else, if you hear nothing else, create a social media presence that adds value to the community around you. So another way of saying that is, don't make your social media be about the organization only. That is not compelling, that's not exciting, and most often that's not helpful or valuable. People go online to find information, to find content that is suitable and helpful for them. That doesn't mean you can't ever talk about your organization or your church, but it means that more often than not, you are adding value and you are enabling your community with content that will help them in their daily lives. So hopefully you can take those 5 steps and begin building your social media base.
Good. So do a couple things and then we'll get to a time of questions and answers. Just want to talk lastly just about facilitating discipleship. I believe this is kind of the holy grail of where churches are going to want to go. I don't think we know how to do it right now. There's online learning, there's a couple different tools, but how do you help facilitate discipleship, I think, is going to be the next wave of apps, because we see how technology does influence behavior. So I think some organizations are just starting to do this, but I think we're going to see a lot more come in this. And again, for me, to truly disciple someone, you can't just do it online only. But I do think it can take away a lot of the administration. It could help take some of the learning and the follow-up and coaching aspects and encourage that when you're in relationship, that time is more valuable. So you're seeing churches and organizations try to build private communities where they're trying to foster that. I think even with mobile, people are wherever they go, they're using their phone. So it's how are you interacting with them? Discipleship may mean getting them access to the sermons and allowing people to access the different resources and content that your church spends so much time building. So you can build an app, which can be pretty expensive. You can try to output your whole website, which can be a little overwhelming in a mobile environment. One of the things that we've done is try to curate where we know what people access when they're online. So we try to deliver 4 or 5 things well, but give them the opt-in button to go see the full website. Because I hate when I'm on my iPad and they won't let me go to the full experience, right? So that's the way that we've approached things and our recommendation. But that's one way you're trying to provide people with the resources and if they're talking to someone and there's an article that they have about evolution or whatever it is, you're trying to help create and provide that value in their hands wherever they are. Again, we've built and are using a system that allows people to interact and follow up on Bible studies and find out who lives within different places and try to connect them into those environments. And then lastly, just technology. Really looking at the capabilities and different things. There's a lot of different ways you can go online. There's a lot of different products as far as social media presence, and if you email Justin, he'll give you his list of recommended. Even for us, it's like, how do you choose a content management solution? One of the things I know people use WordPress and other open source. I found that, and I have about 30 installs of WordPress, so I'm a fan. I found that small churches, a lot of times if they build it on WordPress, they do get into the hosted situation where someone's kind of tweaked it and built it out, and so they're dependent upon them. So it can be a little bit of a challenge. And then on the larger churches side, I've seen churches invest full salaries of several people to customize WordPress, and then they're managing it, and then it's not a free solution anymore. So just be aware of that. There's times where churches, because they've made strategic decisions to invest people's salaries and energy into building that out, that they should and can use that. But just be aware that it's usually what we've found is the hostage situation, or that they're building out, and customizing something that is spending money that may or may not be necessary. We do have a hosted solution. There are a lot of hosted solutions out there where we've got a team of about 20 people managing that and interacting and training and supporting people. The problem with hosting solutions can be that if you find some, they'll put you in a box. And so you'll get into it and then you'll realize, oh man, we do want event registration. We do want online giving. We do want these other tools, and then they don't have that. So one thing that we've done, and I believe there's others that have done this, is we've provided an API framework, meaning you can start small and go big. So we have some of the largest churches in North America on our system because they can customize, and we can give those tools to their team to extend and build out. So you kind of have to pick what type of technologies you're going to use to build these things out. And again, if you email Justin, we'll get you a lot of the different social media platforms and things that we use and would recommend. So with that, I wanted to get to some time of Q&A and answer any questions that you guys might have. And by the way, if you want, I'm putting our contact information, Justin's and mine, and you definitely can email us and we'll get you some of the stats and the other information that we provided today.
There's one in the back there.
Yeah. So the question is, releasing gunners to go online, but if there's all sorts of places they can invest their time, how much does that change staff? Yeah. To create new content? Do you want to take a, so he's saying.
Yeah, I mean, make no mistake about it, it does take time, efforts to really create good content. So it can alter job descriptions. You can also, I come at this from a perspective where I started doing something completely different in the context I was in ministry. I was a youth pastor, and just really started engaging online. And so found nooks and crannies in the day where I could start to create that content. And eventually we started seeing traction in it. And so my job gradually shifted and transitioned to the point where I was doing that full time. And since then, other staff members have begun to do that as well, because you start to see the value in it.
And I would say, I think you need to be clear on what you're trying to do. For example, some churches base their calendar around the sermon. And so I would just find ways of not necessarily creating brand new content all over the place, but how are you going to support the life of that preached word in the community? So it could be questions, it could be responsive, it could be additional thoughts that continue to support the main idea that you want to have in the life of the community. So I wouldn't go and build a whole new set of content, because then they can't track all of that. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you felt like your experience online should drive some in-real life, face-to-face
Yeah.
experience. Now you're also hearing, pastors talking about, wow, their remote viewership is now exceeding what they have in sanctuaries.
Yeah, no, I would hope that we all celebrate that people who may not, because of physical reasons or because of emotional reasons, they're not ready to come into a church, or they're not able to go there physically. If they're watching it online on a video, I think we'd celebrate that, and we want to provide that opportunity. So video is a valuable thing to get that preached word out for people to access.
Are you doing that with any of your clients?
Yes, yeah. So a lot of our clients are doing live streaming or are capturing the video and are displaying it, and then they have an archive of all of the videos that they've preached available to anyone to watch at any point, and they can log in and kind of track the live stream of that. Other questions? Good. All right. Well, we will be here. We're happy to answer any questions. We appreciate your time, and thanks for listening.